Hello there, YouTubes. Now, I was going to do this as an outside walking, talking video, but it's Britain, therefore, obviously, it's fucking raining. It's always fucking raining. Anyway, as the title of this would suggest, it's about cultural appropriation, or more specifically, cultural appropriation when it's talked about as an inherently negative or terrible thing that one should never engage in. And what got me thinking about this was the death a couple of weeks ago, the very sad death of David Bowie. And many of the pieces that were written about his life and his work and stuff focused on the idea that it was negative that he'd culturally appropriated from largely black American culture. And he certainly did, in terms of, like, you can see elements of funk and soul and R&B and stuff like that in his certainly in his later stuff. In his early stuff, he was purely rock and roll or whatever. But anyway, but for those who don't know, cultural appropriation, the idea that if you're from one culture, you shouldn't engage, or when it's when it's talked about in that kind of negative way, almost as a pejorative, basically. It's the idea that if you're from one culture, you shouldn't engage in bits of cultural symbols or cultural music or art forms from another culture because it's theirs. Now, I'd like to make the distinction clearly between cultural theft and cultural appropriation. Cultural theft, when you just steal something from another race and you don't either acknowledge it or in some way try and feed back into that culture or to try and give something back, that would be cultural theft. Now, there are lots of examples of that from, say, early rock and roll people who took black music and black culture and stuff and essentially packaged it for white people and never gave anything back. And indeed, many of them were supporters of, segregation shit, so that black people couldn't even go to their fucking shows to hear these white guys playing black music. It's bizarre. Anyway. So that's one on the one hand, but cultural appropriation for me is actually, I think, a positive thing. Now, if I'm wrong, okay, if you think I'm wrong, don't just call me names and shout at me and call me a prick. Tell me why I'm wrong. Actually engage in a conversation, because I'm more than happy to have that conversation. And indeed, I want that conversation. If I'm wrong, I would want to be told I'm wrong, but I want to be shown how I'm wrong and what actually is right. So please don't just fucking shout at me or call me a fucking racist or whatever, because I'm not. I think my record stands. I'm proud. I can proudly stand on my record of anti-racism. Anyway, although that doesn't necessarily mean you can't be racist afterward, but I don't think I am racist in this instance at all, because for me, cultural appropriation is one of the best bits of multiculturalism, and I'm one of the few people who will stand up in defense of multiculturalism, because for me it's the best of all worlds. Like, you work out that not to be scared of other people when you live in lots of different cultural elements around you. It's actually an anecdotal story, and I won't reveal the name of the person, but a person I know who is a bit older than me, not hugely, so about 10 years older or whatever. He told me once that when he was going through his angry young man phase, and trust me, virtually every man will have an angry young man phase where they sort of go off the rails or they go to an extreme place. For some people, it ends up being like engagement in extreme political nonsense, or extreme types of music, or some sort of cultural genre or subculture or whatever. And in his case, he was a skinhead neo-Nazi prick in his youth. But he said to me, and it's a great line and it stuck with me, he said that once he'd sort of gone through school and gone to work and had to mix and mingle with lots of black people and Asian people and Chinese people and whoever, he said, if you're honest, racism doesn't work. And it stuck with me, that, because I thought to myself, and I sort of pressed him on this and I asked him about it, and he said, basically, if you're intellectually honest, you can't hold the position that all other races are bad by comparison to your own, because he knew lots of white people who were dickheads, and when he was forced to mix with those other races, he found that, yes, some of them were dickheads, but some of them were really great, and he got on with them really well. So he just said it doesn't work, and so he changed from being hateful towards other races to hateful towards pricks, which I think is the ideal situation, and that's how multiculturalism is incredibly positive in a number of ways. And not just that, but you get all that cultural influence, like you get the different foods, the different music, the different TV and cinema, and all of that into a mixing pot. And actually, it works really well for the most part. Not that there aren't issues, of course there are fucking issues, but mostly those that are around are not actually mixing. About sort of ghettoizing, and allowing that kind of in-group preference to take over and exist in little pockets of like a city on your own. When people actually mingle, it works really well. And for me, to get back to sort of the topic of cultural appropriation, that's where cultural appropriation is actually a really good thing. Because when people talk about it as a bad thing, and it's usually by those on the left, and I think it comes from a good place that they're trying to be culturally sensitive, to apportion correctly praise for cultural achievements, like creating certain sort of musical styles or whatever. They don't necessarily want someone else's race to get the credit for that. And so I think they're coming from a good place, but it's incredibly misguided. Because for me, what they end up doing is almost trying to enforce a certain kind of cultural segregationism, whereby if you're, say, look, great examples like David Bowie or Eminem or whoever, like people from one race taking the musical genre of another race and doing it really well, but not in a way of cultural theft, because they, I think in both instances, for all their faults, they're human beings, of course, gave something back. In the form of with Eminem, he created his sort of spin-off group thing, or his little project of D12, which were black guys, and it gave them a kind of step up into the music business. And not just that, but it always sort of gives props to the black culture from which he takes. And in the case of David Bowie, and if I can find the clip, I'll link it below. It's a great clip of him castigating MTV for not playing the black artists, or not playing enough black artists anyway. Because this is back in the day when MTV, music television, actually played music on the television. I know it seems crazy, but trust me, there were days when that actually was true. And he spoke out hugely in favour of them playing much more black music, and his support for black musicians and stuff like that. The fact that he was involved in a black marriage, which I think to a degree puts paid to the idea that he was always a fascist. Like, he may have been in his youth, again, the angry young man bit. Like, I'm not doing sort of special pleading on behalf of men, but when you're an angry young man, you essentially have to let them ride the storm out. You're not going to get rid of it, as much as that would be ideal. It's not going to fucking happen. So you have to let them ride it out. And clearly he did, because he wasn't a fascist all of his life. He may have been in his youth. He certainly wasn't when he grew up. Because, like I say, his championing of black music, his playing of black music, and his enjoyment of black culture, and the fact he married a black woman, clearly shows, clearly shows that he wasn't, he wasn't a fascist at the end. Clearly far from it. And so for me, yeah, anyway, cultural appropriation. The basic point I want to get across to you is, for me, it's the best of multiculturalism. When you try and say it's inherently bad, what you're doing is hiving off parts of culture that only certain people can engage in, and that's BS. Because some of the best culture you'll ever see is, one culture mixing with another culture and another and another, and creating this completely new thing. That's how art evolves and becomes incredibly brilliant in a number of ways. Like, if David Bowie had not created that music using black cultural themes and different types of music, I think the world would be a poorer place for it. Do you know what I mean? Like, and it doesn't just work with white people doing black stuff. There are loads and loads of examples of black people doing white, what were traditionally white things, or going back to the ancient days of, ancient civilizations, taking on the cultural symbols and the different art forms and stuff from, previous civilizations and stuff. It's something that's always happened and always will happen. And for me, that's a beautiful thing, because it means that, as civilizations, we don't stagnate. And for me, it's the ultimate example of how multiculturalism does, and is working, and it's what we need to go forward. So yeah, that's basically all I have to say on this. If you disagree, please don't be a prick about it. Talk to me about it. Okay. Thank you all for listening, watching. That's all you can do. You can't really smell it or taste it, can you? Anyway, but hopefully you felt it. Oh, what a fucking line to end on that is. Anyway, I'm talking shit now. I'll see you all later. Bip bip.